when we finished our 12 weeks, they sent about 20 of us in Alpha. By the way, they sent people out to different areas in alphabetical order. Bloom, 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 bloom. When it got down to the S's, they sent 20 of us to Bradley Field, Connecticut. Put us on a train, troop train, went right through Washington, D.C., stayed on that troop train for about 2 days, and wound up at Bradley Field, Connecticut. That was the first time we had been able to eat in a mess hall, because they assigned us to a certain area there, and we went into a barracks. And what was happening in that area, it was an area suitable to a squadron to train them, and the cadre who lived there to train began advanced individual training for each one of us in whatever assigned Army occupational number. So my number was 510, which was a plotter and teller for an Air Defense Control Center. Well, we had intense training with identification of aircraft, how to triangulate, and things of that sort. Skills that we would need in how to operate our headsets and practicing reporting to each other as we would have to do later on. We had been there about 2 weeks, I guess, and this was kind of like January, February, early in the following year, 1944, because they were getting near the end of assembling the 302nd Fighter Control Squadron. Training units had a name, and that one was named 390 something ahead of us. So the actual squadron number that we became was 302nd Fighter Control Squadron, and they assigned that to us not long before we were put on a troop train to go overseas, which occurred in the first week of June. So when I completed, we were all completing at the same time, the last of us to arrive, because when they staff an Army unit, they staff it first with the officer and then with the non-coms, and then down to the bottom ranking people. We were the bottom ranks in there, and the last one to arrive to complete the complement of people with the necessary training for the squadron to be considered okay to go into action. So we had a little bit of adventure there. I'd like to tell about it without having to time it precisely. But during that 90 days that we were in advanced individual training there, one of the first good things that happened to us was being assigned to a barracks where we had double-decker bunks to sleep on instead of canvas cots, because in basic training at Keesler Field, we slept on canvas cots. And I heard how many people, I'm not sure, that if they had had a chance, would have killed Lieutenant Shipp. It was common. He was severely hated by people who went in there for basic training because they thought he should, recruits, thought he should let us get out of that bad weather and into the barracks, because they had some empty barracks since they were reducing the amount of trainees there. He had not done that. Back to Bradley Field. As soon as we got there, the barracks and with the bunk beds and the heaters. By the way, that's an adventure about the heaters too. I'll tell you about it. One of the most exciting things we had happen early on, however, was to march to the mess hall and be able to go back for seconds and eat all you wanted of anything that they had. That was a grand privilege, because in order to teach us discipline, they properly, in basic training, fed us what we should eat. That was it. They had some butterscotch pie sliced, trays and trays of it. And here are nearly 300 people of our squadron going in there, and in that group are about 60 of us who are low-ranked people, you know, privates, PFCs, corporals, that's about it. At any rate, everyone who ate at that mess hall was able to eat all that pie they wanted. The pie had evidently been sitting out too long, and we got food poisoning.
Oh, no.
The food poisoning was so bad that the people that came down with it, the ambulances, they didn't have enough ambulances.
Oh, gosh.
They didn't have enough 6x6s, which is what
Right.
a two dual-wheeled Army vehicle. Didn't have enough of them to haul the sick people to the hospital. So I rode to the hospital as soon as I felt nauseous in a dump truck, in the back of a dump truck. And it was, the hospital was at the other end of Bradley Field somewhere, I don't know where it was. But I want to tell you, I was sick, vomiting and diarrhea. And when I got to the hospital, there was a stream of feces and urine from where the trucks unloaded.
Oh my God.
It was a horrible thing. And there were people who were in intensive care type, you know, who had to be given infusions, or some of them had to be given blood. They were sick. As far as I know, nobody died. If they had, they wouldn't have told us. But we stayed in the hospital for several days from that illness, and it was worse than the flu, that's for sure.
How you feel about butterscotch pie?
I did not want to see any butterscotch pie until long after I had got out of the military 28 months later. And
I can't imagine. Jesus.
yes, and I had also eaten some corned beef at one time and got sick on it, and had the same thing happen to me. I couldn't stand the taste of it for years. And now, you know, after about 20 years, I was no longer allergic to it, I presume. At any rate, another adventure I had there on that basic training in that barracks and so forth, they assigned some details, duties that had to be performed. And they assigned me the fireman's duty, which was to keep the fires burning in all the furnaces. Now this is about, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 two-story barracks with a big furnace burning, coal burning furnace, where the fire was to be kept going and coal was to be added at the proper time. I never did learn how to keep the coal fire burning in those barracks. everybody was looking for the fireman that was supposed to have kept their name. I was scared to death they want to catch me. They would have beat me to death or killed me if they could have found me. But I didn't tell them what was going, except the guy that gave me my instructions. There was 2 feet of snow on the ground, Tommy, when that was taking place. I just knew they were going to get a hold of me, and I never did learn how to do those doggone fires. Couldn't get anybody to teach me. So I did most of my maintaining at night, so they couldn't see me. In fact, I was on night duty. They had night duty and day duty. And I was on night duty, and that way they didn't see who I was. I lucked out.
It sounds like
I lucked out. I survived that.
sounds like
But
you're
this boy from Louisiana that had never seen a coal fire in his life, except in one location, the brand new 1927 school that I began to attend in Provençal had a coal-fired furnace. I never saw it,
yeah.
but it was downstairs in the basement. And I was wishing I had learned how. But this little Louisiana boy, I'll tell you, with that whole bunch of Yankees I was with.
Well, I got to make a comment. It's occurring to me. This is now about February, getting into March.
Yes.
You're up in Connecticut, and you had seen 2 feet of snow on the ground at some point. It wasn't that long ago. Wasn't even a year. It was less than maybe 6 months that you had been in the warmth of Louisiana milking cows at LSU, getting ready to enroll in the fall semester. So from that date to March, so that would have been about September 43
Yeah.
into March of 44.
Right.
That 6, 7 months, that was a culture shock.
Oh, it was a culture shock.
And let me add to it.
Certainly.
And then you spent 4 weeks worth of basic training sick, not able to do anything. Then you got the food poisoning, and then you got the encounter with the cold night of not knowing how to do a coal-fired furnace. Culture shock. And in what I would call somewhat adversity with no friend in sight.
Tom, let me tell you a little incident that happened at Keesler Field before I went on into this, and I'll pick it up where you just pointed out what I was experiencing. When I got out of the hospital from pneumonia of 2 weeks and went back to the orderly room, there was somebody in there on day duty. You know, they leave somebody in there so it's not vandalized or, at any rate, the little guy who was in there he panicked when he realized I wasn't with my unit, which was out on bivouac. He got a hold of somebody who took me in a Jeep and took me about 10 miles out on the Gulf Coast to where my unit was bivouacked. It was raining and freezing. An officer, a lieutenant, asked the guy driving the Jeep, "Who is that?" And he told me, and he said, "Well, what you doing here now?" He said, "Where'd you come from, soldier?" I said, "I just got out of the hospital with pneumonia." He yelled at that driver and told him, "Get this man out of here. Get him back, put him in the barracks, and don't bring him back." And I was grateful to that lieutenant for being perceptive enough to know that I couldn't sleep in freezing water on my. By the way, what was happening in Biloxi at that time was the most difficult winter that had been occurred there in many years. So I went on to Connecticut, and they were having a rough winter up there. There I was, walking around in the middle of the night, trying to build coal fires. This little old Louisiana boy.
Are you missing your cows?
Oh, Lord. I slept in warm rooms at LSU. So, Tom, back to Bradley Field, I went through that basic and advanced individual training there, and it kept preparing us with additional equipment and so forth, which was being accumulated that would be traveling with us wherever we went to do our fighting if we went overseas. In other words, they were preparing us for overseas departure. I wasn't familiar with that process, but I got familiar with it pretty quick. So at the end of our 12 weeks of advanced individual training, the typical thing is allow the soldier to go home if you can do it. So I was given a week leave, and so I went home to see my family, which I did. I hitchhiked part of the way, rode on a train part of the way, because I didn't have much money. By the way, when I went into the Army, the private was paid $50 a month. So I had made out, my brother Frank had been drafted earlier, and he had made out an allotment to a dependent mother. I made out an allotment to a dependent father. The military permitted that. So while he and I were in the military, our parents received $20 deducted from my 50 and $20 deducted from his 50 each month until we were discharged. Very interesting, because that's the most cash that had been on that hill at Provençal since my parents had moved there, or since the Depression began. And that's just an aside. So I started hitchhiking back to save my money to Connecticut to return. And so I left a day early to get there, because I wasn't sure how long it was going to take me, because I didn't have enough money to do train fare or bus ticket to get back to Connecticut. So I just went out hitchhiking, but it became so difficult by the time I got to Indiana that when I got to Indiana on my way back, Indianapolis, I bought a bus ticket and rode back to Bradley Field. When I got back to Bradley Field, there was an interesting thing that happened. I went to the orderly room to report in, and the first sergeant was there. He laughed at me and said, "Hey, Sylvest, why did you come back a day early?" I did not know that when you went on leave, you had an automatic grace period of 24 hours in which to report back to whatever your duty station was. Mm-hmm. So he didn't do a thing but find me a job and put me to work. And after I got back there, it didn't take them a week, because on June 8th, we got on board a boat. So it must have been about the 5th of June that we got orders the orders came through for our unit to be placed on a train to be shipped overseas. Before they put us on a train, they issued to us, the entire unit, the very most advanced winter weather equipment, coats, clothing, all kind of things, gloves. Scared me to death. I could not stand that cold weather there in Connecticut or even Biloxi, let alone. And we got on that train and headed north into Vermont. Traveled for about 4 hours. The train stopped. Turned around. It didn't turn around, they just pulled it backwards. I'm not sure how they handled that. But suddenly we were going west. And by the next time we saw daylight, we were across the Mississippi in St. Louis. Figured we were headed for California. Except you wouldn't be going to California with new winter clothing. Scared us to death. Scared me to death. When we got to St. Louis, we turned northwest and wound up in Seattle.
Jeez.
We stopped someplace in Nebraska, the train did, long enough for some of the people there to be serving hot chocolate and donuts. And so I got that to eat. Otherwise, we didn't have anything to eat on that trip from Connecticut to Seattle for 48 hours. That's not something somebody goofed, because that's not something that the Army did willingly. At any rate, we were hungry. And they took us straight to Fort Lawton, which is in Seattle, and we were given overseas shots, inoculations, bubonic plague, and all kind of things of that sort. They update us with tetanus. So here we are, having been without food for 48 hours, standing in line, stark naked, being given shots on arms on either side before we had an opportunity to eat. We were disturbed because we could see through the fence, which was 12 feet high, a hog wire fence, or a fence where you could keep prisoners in there. And Italian prisoners were sitting at tables over that fence, drinking mugs of beer. You talk about a mad bunch of naked people, hungry and starving.
The natives were restless.
The natives were restless. Well, we got on a train and of course we were fed shortly thereafter, as soon as they could arrange it. And they weren't abusing us. It just so happened that a mishap took place, and we were experiencing the victims.
Little snafu and logistics.
This happens. This happens. And of course, you learn that those kind of things happen, whether you're in the military or anywhere else on Earth, you know. So we got on they moved all of us immediately onto a ship called the USS U.S. Grant. The second U.S. standing for United States steamship.